The dawn of the 60s often brings a shift in perspective, where the accumulation of years meets the desire for continued expansion and clarity. A future of vibrant mental acuity is not merely a stroke of genetic luck, but a deliberate alignment of lifestyle and intention. The prevailing belief that cognitive decline is an inevitable companion of aging serves as a limitation, a barrier that prevents many from seeking the vitality that is rightfully theirs. This narrative suggests that memory loss is simply a tax paid for longevity. Yet emerging understanding reveals that specific dietary choices accelerate this process by clogging the very channels of perception and thought. By identifying and removing the obstacles that obscure the mind, one can reclaim the natural state of alertness and connection. This journey explores the removal of 4 specific dietary impediments, guided by the holistic understanding that the body is the temple of the spirit and that physical purity enhances spiritual and mental clarity. It is a path toward an ageless mind, fueled by intention and sustained by choices that honor the life force within. The deceptive sweetness of mental fog, the consumption of refined sugar and processed carbohydrates, represents the first and perhaps most pervasive obstacle to maintaining cognitive clarity after the age of 60. While often viewed as harmless treats or sources of quick energy, these substances initiate a cascade of physiological responses that directly undermine the brain's ability to function optimally. When high levels of glucose flood the bloodstream, the body responds with a surge of insulin, a hormone designed to regulate sugar levels. Over time, the repeated demand for insulin can lead to a state of resistance, where the cells no longer respond efficiently to the hormone signal. This phenomenon, often described as type 3 diabetes when it affects the brain, hampers the neuron's ability to metabolize glucose, their primary fuel source. The result is a brain that is literally starving for energy despite being awash in sugar, leading to the gradual atrophy of the hippocampus, the memory center of the mind. Wayne Dyer often spoke of the need to eliminate erroneous zones, self-defeating behaviors that block personal freedom, and biologically, reliance on sugar is a physical manifestation of such a zone. The spike in blood sugar creates a fleeting sensation of vitality, a temporary high that mimics true energy but lacks its substance. This is quickly followed by a crash that leaves the individual feeling depleted, foggy, and irritable. This cycle mirrors the pursuit of external validation over internal peace. It is a search for sustenance in something that ultimately drains rather than fills. The inflammation triggered by chronic high blood sugar travels systemically, crossing the blood-brain barrier and activating immune cells in the brain called microglia. These cells, when chronically overactive, release inflammatory cytokines that damage neural connections, effectively pruning the intricate web of memories and skills that define a person's history and capabilities. The metabolic impact of sugar extends beyond simple inflammation. It disrupts the delicate balance of neurotransmitters essential for mood and cognition. High sugar intake has been linked to reduced levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new synapses. Without this vital factor, the brain loses its plasticity, the ability to adapt and rewire itself in response to new information. For a person over 60, whose brain requires robust support to maintain its complex functions, the suppression of this growth factor is detrimental. It renders the mind rigid, making it difficult to learn new things or recall names and events, reinforcing the fear that the mind is naturally fading. Consider the daily routine of a retired professional who begins the day with a sweet pastry and a coffee laden with syrup. The initial burst of alertness feels productive, allowing for the completion of a morning crossword or review of the news. However, by mid-morning, a heaviness sets in, a mental lethargy that makes simple tasks feel burdensome. This is not merely tiredness. It is the physiological come-down of a sugar spike, a moment where the brain's fuel supply becomes unstable. The individual might reach for another sweet snack to regain focus, unknowingly perpetuating the cycle of inflammation and insulin resistance. This pattern, repeated over years, calcifies into a state of chronic cognitive dampening, where the vibrant sharpness of the past becomes a distant memory. There's a profound connection between the quality of fuel provided to the body and the quality of thought produced by the mind. Choosing foods that sustain rather than spike energy levels is an act of self-respect and a declaration of intent to remain present and aware. Complex carbohydrates found in vegetables and whole grains release their energy slowly, providing a steady stream of fuel that allows the brain to operate without the chaotic fluctuations of a sugar rush. This steady state fosters a calmness of mind, a biological serenity that aligns with the spiritual practice of staying centered. It allows the individual to observe the world with clarity rather than through the haze of metabolic instability. It is understandable that letting go of these comforting foods is difficult, as they are often tied to memories of celebration and solace. The transition away from refined sugars is not merely a dietary adjustment, but a psychological one, requiring the individual to find sweetness in life itself rather than in edible substitutes. The brain, remarkably resilient, can begin to repair itself once the onslaught of inflammation subsides. Insulin sensitivity can improve, and the production of neurotrophic factors can resume, allowing the fog to lift. This restoration of clarity is often described as waking up from a long slumber, where the details of the world suddenly appear sharper and more vibrant. The limitation of this approach lies in the ubiquity of hidden sugars in the modern food supply. Even those with the best intentions may find themselves consuming significant amounts of sugar through savory sauces, breads, and healthy processed snacks. Therefore, vigilance and education become spiritual tools, means of guarding the temple against unseen contaminants. It requires a conscious effort to read labels and understand that the industry's drive for palatability often comes at the cost of the consumer's cognitive health. By stripping away these hidden sugars, the individual reclaims agency over their biology, refusing to be a passive recipient of ingredients that dull the senses. One might try to soothe with sweetness that I could heal with presence. The heavy burden of rigid fats. The second major category of dietary obstruction involves trans fats and damaged oils, substances that fundamentally alter the structural integrity of brain cells. The human brain is largely composed of fat, and the quality of the fats consumed directly dictates the quality of the cell membranes within the nervous system. Trans fats, often found in fried foods, commercially baked goods, and margarine, are synthetic or chemically altered fats that are rigid and stable at room temperature. When these fats are incorporated into cell walls, they render the membrane stiff and less permeable. This rigidity impairs the ability of receptors on the cell surface to communicate effectively, creating a biological blockage that mirrors a closed mind. In the philosophy of Wayne Dyer, flow and flexibility are characteristics of the Tao, the natural order of the universe. A mind that is open to all possibilities is a mind that flows like water. Biologically, the brain requires fluid, flexible membranes to transmit signals at lightning speed. When trans fats replace healthy, fluid fats like omega-3s, the transmission of neurotransmitters slows down. This slowing of signal velocity manifests as delayed reaction times, difficulty in retrieving words, and a general sense of mental sluggishness. It is a literal hardening of the head, where the physical pathways of thought become resistant to the flow of information. The impact of these rigid fats extends to the vascular system, which supplies the brain with oxygen and nutrients. Trans fats are notorious for raising levels of low-density lipoprotein, the bad cholesterol, while lowering the beneficial high-density lipoprotein. This imbalance promotes the formation of arterial plaques, narrowing the blood vessels and restricting blood flow to the brain. A brain deprived of adequate blood flow is a brain in survival mode, prioritizing basic functions over higher-order thinking and memory storage. This state of chronic low-level ischemia contributes silently to the degeneration of cognitive faculties, often unnoticed until significant damage has occurred. Imagine a scenario where a family gathers for a traditional Sunday dinner featuring fried chicken and biscuits made with shortening. The meal is delicious and steeped in tradition, yet the ingredients carry a hidden cost. In the hours following the meal, the blood thickens with triglycerides, and the inflammatory response is triggered within the vascular walls. The senior members of the family may feel a heavy fatigue, attributing it to a food coma, but in reality, it is a sign of systemic stress. The brain struggles to maintain its optimal electrical activity amidst the influx of inflammatory lipids. Over time, these weekly rituals contribute to a cumulative deficit in neural plasticity, making the mind less agile and more prone to the ruts of repetitive, negative thinking. There is a profound liberation in choosing fats that support fluidity and life. Replacing hydrogenated oils with olive oil, avocado, and nuts is akin to oiling the hinges of a rusty door. It allows movement to return. These healthy fats integrate into cell membranes, restoring their suppleness and enhancing the sensitivity of neurotransmitter receptors. This physiological shift often runs parallel to a psychological opening. As the biology of the brain becomes more fluid, the individual may find it easier to let go of rigid opinions and embrace new perspectives. The connection between physical flexibility and mental adaptability is a core tenet of holistic health, reinforcing the idea that the body and mind are not separate entities, but different expressions of the same life force. It is important to acknowledge that trans fats were once heralded as a technological triumph of food preservation, designed to extend shelf life and reduce costs. This historical context highlights how solutions disconnected from nature often lead to unforeseen consequences. The preservation of the food comes at the cost of the deterioration of the consumer. Recognizing this trade-off is an act of awareness. It involves seeing past the convenience and economic incentives of the food industry to the biological reality of what is being ingested. It is a refusal to trade the longevity of the mind for the longevity of a product on a shelf. The elimination of trans fats is not merely a restriction, but a restoration of natural order. It is a return to foods that spoil, foods that are alive and subject to the cycles of nature. By consuming fats that are in harmony with the body's needs, the individual aligns themselves with the energy of life rather than the stasis of chemical preservation. This alignment fosters a sense of lightness and clarity, reducing the noise in the neural circuits. The memory improves not because a pill was taken, but because the interference was removed, allowing the natural brilliance of the mind to shine through. Where in my life am I holding on to rigidity instead of allowing flow? The toxic preservation of the past, the third and fourth categories of dietary hazards, often intertwine. Processed meats containing nitrates and the broader spectrum of artificial additives, including sweeteners like aspartame. These substances represent a departure from real food, introducing chemical compounds that the body often struggles to recognize and process. Processed meats, such as bacon, deli slices, and sausages, are frequently cured with nitrates and nitrites to preserve color and prevent bacterial growth. Upon ingestion, these compounds can convert into nitrosamines, which are potent oxidants. In the brain, oxidative stress acts like rust, corroding the cellular machinery and damaging the mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of the cells. This chemical assault is compounded by the presence of artificial additives and sweeteners, which often accompany a diet high in processed foods. The fourth food category can be broadly understood as these synthetic disruptors. Additives like aspartame have been subject to controversy, with some research suggesting they can cross the blood-brain barrier and modulate neurotransmitter activity in unfavorable ways. From a holistic perspective, these chemicals represent a distortion of reality, a sweetness without calories, a pinkness without freshness. They confuse the body's innate intelligence, signaling the arrival of nutrients that never come, leading to metabolic dysregulation and a sense of internal dissonance. Wayne Dyer emphasized the importance of being real and authentic. Consuming highly processed, chemically altered foods is an engagement with the artificial. When the body is inundated with preservatives, it is forced to divert significant energy toward detoxification. The liver and kidneys work overtime to filter out these foreign substances, leaving less energy available for cognitive maintenance and repair. This diversion of resources can manifest as brain fog, a lack of mental endurance, and difficulties with short-term memory. The body is effectively fighting a low-grade war against these intruders, a conflict that drains the vitality needed for creative thought and spiritual connection. Consider an individual who relies on diet sodas and prepackaged deli sandwiches for lunch, believing they are making a healthy, low-calorie choice. The nitrates in the meat and the artificial sweeteners in the drink create a chemical cocktail that spikes oxidative stress markers in the blood. While the calorie count may be low, the toxic load is high. The afternoon slump that follows is often treated with caffeine, masking the underlying signal that the body is under siege. This reliance on the artificial disconnects the person from their body's true signals of hunger and satiety, creating a rift between the physical self and the conscious mind. The transition to whole, uncured proteins and natural hydration is a journey toward authenticity. Eating foods that are close to their source, organic poultry, legumes, fresh water, provides the body with the clean building blocks it needs to repair and regenerate. This shift reduces the oxidative burden on the brain, allowing the antioxidant systems to function effectively. The result is a preservation of the self rather than a preservation of the food. The mind becomes clearer, the memory more retentive, and the overall sense of well-being is enhanced. It is a move from a defensive posture where the body is constantly detoxifying to a creative posture where the body is thriving. However, the convenience of processed foods is a powerful lure in a fast-paced world. These products are engineered to be hyper-palatable and are marketed as time savers. The counter-argument to avoiding them is often one of practicality and cost. Yet the true cost is paid in cognitive decline and lost vitality. Viewing the preparation of fresh food not as a chore, but as a meditative act can shift this perspective. It becomes a ritual of self-care, a tangible way to love oneself and honor the vessel of life. The elimination of these toxins is also a symbolic release of the past. Preservatives are designed to keep things as they were, to halt the natural process of change. By consuming fresh, living foods, one embraces the present moment and the natural cycle of renewal. This aligns with the spiritual understanding that life is lived in the now. A mind free from the interference of chemical disruptors is more capable of experiencing the richness of the present, unburdened by the physiological noise of toxicity. Why do I choose the convenience of the artificial over the vitality of the real? Returning to the source of vitality, the journey through the landscape of dietary choices reveals a singular truth. The state of the mind is inextricably linked to the purity of the body. By stepping away from sugar, trans fats, processed meats, and artificial additives, the individual removes the chemical static that disrupts the broadcast of consciousness. This is not merely about avoiding illness. It is about cultivating a high-frequency environment where the mind can operate at its highest potential. The four foods are symbolic of a broader disconnection from nature, and their removal signifies a return to the source. The cumulative effect of these changes is a profound restoration of cognitive resilience. The brain, relieved of the constant burden of inflammation and oxidative stress, begins to function with renewed efficiency. Neural pathways that seemed blocked reopen, and the ability to retain and recall information improves. This physical renewal supports a spiritual expansion. With a clear mind, the wisdom of the years can be accessed and shared, rather than being obscured by the fog of poor health. The senior years transform from a time of decline into a period of deep synthesis and creative contribution. Dyer taught that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings having a human experience. To honor this experience, the vehicle, the body, must be treated with reverence. Choosing foods that are alive, vibrant, and natural is a form of worship, a daily affirmation of life. It is a refusal to be diminished by the unconscious habits of a toxic food culture. Instead, it is a conscious decision to age with energy, bringing the full light of one's consciousness into every moment. The promise of a sharp, ageless mind is fulfilled not by a magic bullet, but by the consistent application of these principles. It is a path of subtraction, removing the false, the rigid, and the toxic to reveal the inherent brilliance that was there all along. As the fog lifts, the future is no longer feared, but embraced as a canvas for new learning and deeper connection. The clarity gained is the ultimate freedom, allowing the individual to live fully, love deeply, and leave a legacy of vitality. What step will I take today to honor the clarity I deserve?